when, some 4,000 years ago, the Almighty called the prophet Moses onto the Mount Sinai and delivered to him his 10 commandments in order to be obeyed. The Almighty is deemed to have known exactly how important those 10 commandments were. He gave those 10 commandments not merely in order to glorify him, but also to protect us human beings, and especially his chosen race, the Israelites, both in the wilderness and later in the promised land. The 7th commandment, that thou shalt not commit adultery, and the 10th commandment, thou shalt not covet, or in modern English, you shall not commit adultery, and you shall not covet, or covet as some people prefer to pronounce that word, were most certainly to protect us against abuse, against our being degraded, against all the consequences which might befall us in following the carnal nature of our world. Adultery was punished by stoning. The stoning upon both the adulteress and the adulteress, both of whom were equally to blame. The recent case before the Honourable Judiciary in Avignon, in the Republic of France, most certainly and even emphatically pointed out how dreadful the situations can be when we disobey the commandments of God the Almighty. I fail not merely to comprehend the fact that how such shocking incident could have taken place, not merely in the presence of the husband of the victim, but how dreadful the situation has been each and every time when a husband not merely tolerated such a situation, but encouraged such incidents to occur. And even how dreadfully he even video recorded such dreadful incidents taking place. According to the story of the creation, or the history of the creation, God created a woman because he found out that no other creation was suitable for a man. And even Jesus Christ in the New Testament, answering the question to the Pharisees, said, when a man marries a woman, they are no longer two but become one flesh. In a simple clarification, we know that the woman married to a man is no longer a separate person, but is the other half of the man, perhaps even the better half. The woman is most certainly who marries a husband and becomes his wife is no longer inferior to the man or the husband by any means. She is most certainly his equal. Perhaps, as I already said, even his better half. If a man disregards his wife, he disregards himself, even being created in the image of God, the Almighty, even befitting the very first 2 chapters of the book of Genesis, or the very first book of the Holy Bible, or the Torah as a whole. Too frequently misinterpreting the commandments given by God, we bring upon our own selves nothing other than shame and disgrace. But this shame and disgrace we could have avoided if we committed ourselves to obey the commandments of God the Almighty. 2 verses are often too frequently abused. I'm referring to 2 verses in the New Testament. One of them is that Jesus Christ said, "Judge not, that you shall not be judged." And the other one found, or I should say the other one verses, those verses found in the modern translation of the Holy Bible, John's Gospel, chapter 8. The passage known as the adulterous woman. Too frequently we are tempted to believe that Jesus Christ overruled the commandments of God by telling the woman, "Has not your accusers condemned you?" And her reply, "No, sir, no one did." Jesus Christ wanted to point out that an adultery could not be committed without 2 individuals. When that woman was brought before him, I am referring to Jesus Christ, and he began writing on the ground, he did not disobey God's commandments or overrule them or even relax them. But he wanted to query, "You brought this woman before me, but where is the other one, the man who committed the adultery with her? How can I condemn this woman without first condemning the man who committed adultery with her?" The act of mercy did not overrule the commandments, but the act of mercy that's shown by Jesus Christ was to point out that do not simply judge the woman without judging the man who also committed this adultery with her. And the other one verse where Jesus said, "Judge not, that you shall not be judged, and condemn not, that you shall not be condemned," was not to overrule the commandments of God, but to point out the very simple fact that before you judge others, judge your own self. When you point out at someone with your index, the second finger in our arms, I should say in our hands, 3 of your other fingers point at you. I remain very gratefully obliged to the Honourable Judiciary of France, the Republic of France, who convicted so many men while Mrs. Giselle were intoxicated and were fast asleep. But such a situation could never have occurred, even at its initial stage, if the 7th and the 10 commandments given by God the Almighty on Mount Sinai some 4,000 years ago were obeyed by her husband and also by those who are convicted today by the Honourable Judiciary of France. This day is a happy day for me because some justice is done, even though too little and too late. In the Islamic Republic of Iran, thousands of women are being convicted, tortured, imprisoned, and murdered, if I may use the expression instead of saying simply being killed, because they happen to be women. And how can those people say that they are representing God the Almighty when they forget the dignity of women by whom we were born, we were brought onto this earth to see the light? The fact remains indisputable, and the fact remains fact, that none of us would be born today without women, without our mothers. Even according to the New Testament, Jesus Christ had to be born of the Blessed Virgin Miriam or Mary. She was no doubt a girl or a woman. I fail to understand how can a husband not merely allow but encourage such acts to take place in our world, even during the 21st century, during this new third millennium. Christmas is a season which reminds us of the Blessed Virgin giving birth to the Christ child. This is the time we should remember the values of girls and ladies on our earth, without whom we could not be here today. The manhood or the manlyhood of every single man is proven only by the fact that he represents the true virtue of man, which is protecting the weak, not exposing them to the danger. We are, individually and collectively, even as men, called upon to protect women of our earth, of our world, on our earth. The International Criminal Court of Justice, sitting in The Hague, might have condemned nations and states for carrying out, in their view, atrocities, perhaps violating human rights, committing war crimes. But why do they fail to condemn those states and their leaders which oppress, exploit, imprison, kill, even murder women arbitrarily? A question I ask my own self, and with all due respect venture to raise this question upon the minds of my fellow global citizens, particularly my fellow global men. I thank you in anticipation for your kind understanding and bid you a solemn night, remembering that none of us, not a single one of us, would be here on earth without our mothers, who happen to be women. And therefore we are duty-bound to protect the legitimate interests and rights of women, even as their fellow global citizens, whether we be their husbands or outsiders. Thank you and good night.